Rain was dripping against the window when Lena first noticed the change. She had been sitting on her worn armchair, a cup of tea warming her hands, staring absent-mindedly at the gray sky. The evening felt ordinary, almost boring, until a voice, soft, hesitant, drifted through the thin walls of her apartment. Her neighbor, someone she had known only in passing, had a way of speaking that seemed ordinary until it wasn't. She'd often heard him from the hallway, a door shutting too quickly, the clatter of keys, or the occasional laughter that stopped suddenly, leaving a quiet hollow. But this time, it was different. His voice carried a pause that lingered, like he was holding back something he wasn't ready to say. Curiosity nudged her toward the door. Lena tiptoed to her own, peeking out just enough to see him standing there in the dim light of the corridor. His hand hovered over a stack of letters, and he looked down at them as if deciding which one to open first. The way he paused mid-sentence, the exact moment when words seemed ready to spill, but didn't, made the air between them charged, almost alive. It wasn't that they were strangers. Lena had seen him at the mailboxes, nodded in passing, exchanged polite greetings. But tonight, something fragile and unspoken stretched between them, as though that single hesitation carried a story she was meant to feel rather than hear. She retreated quickly, heart unexpectedly fluttering. Lena told herself it was the rain, the quietness, the lonely stretch of evening, yet her mind kept returning to that suspended moment. She wondered what he had wanted to say, and why he hadn't. There was a softness in him, a vulnerability she hadn't noticed before, and for some reason, it unsettled her in a way that was entirely new. Later, while she poured the tea into her favorite mug again, Lena noticed her phone buzzing. A text from him, short and hesitant. "Are you up? Could use a quick favor." Her heart skipped. A favor. It could be anything. Picking up groceries, borrowing a tool, delivering a package. Yet the simplicity of it made her pulse race. Lena slipped on her shoes and grabbed her umbrella, walking down the wet corridor. Every step felt heavier than it should, every echo of her footsteps pressing her towards something undefined. When she reached his door, he was standing there, slightly hunched as though bracing himself against an invisible weight. He smiled, a small, awkward gesture, and for a moment, Lena felt the space between them shrink. "Thanks for coming," he said, voice low, almost a whisper, yet steady enough to anchor her. "Of course," she replied, feeling the unusual warmth of wanting to be there, wanting to understand. The favor turned out to be simple. He needed help arranging boxes in his storage area. Yet as they moved crates and shuffle items around, the air between them thickened in a strange, gentle tension. Every movement, every glance, seemed layered with meaning. Lena noticed the way he hesitated before speaking, the pauses he couldn't quite smooth over, and felt drawn to the quiet honesty in those gaps. Time slipped by almost unnoticed, marked only by the rhythm of their shared tasks and the soft patter of rain outside. Lena caught herself listening harder to what wasn't said than to the words themselves. There was something raw in that silence, a fragile connection that made her acutely aware of how little she really knew about the people she lived next to. By the time she was heading back to her own apartment, the sky had darkened into a deep, endless blue, and the rain had slowed to a gentle drizzle. She lingered in the doorway for a heartbeat, recalling the subtle weight of his unspoken thoughts and the unexpected tenderness in his pauses. Once inside, Lena sank into her chair again, gripping her mug tightly. The memory of his hesitation stayed with her, resonating long after the hallway lights faded. It was strange how one brief pause could feel like the start of something vast, something neither of them yet understood. She whispered to herself, almost unconsciously, "Maybe some moments are meant to change everything, even if only a little." The next morning, Lena found herself glancing toward his door, expecting nothing, hoping for a trace of the previous night's quiet magic. She wondered if he remembered that same tension, that same unspoken thread, or if it had disappeared with the rain. If you're enjoying this story so far, please like the video and subscribe for more heartfelt tales. And just as she considered turning away, the hallway light flickered and his door creaked open slightly, revealing a shadow of him, lingering as if waiting. The next day, Lena found herself walking slower than usual, her thoughts circling the night before. The way he had paused, just for a moment, was still vivid in her mind. She replayed it over and over, as though that single hesitation had left a mark she couldn't shake. The hallway smelled faintly of rain and old carpet. She noticed small things she'd never paid attention to, the way his doormat curled at the edges, the tiny potted plant by his door, the soft hum of music escaping through the cracks. It all felt like pieces of him he hadn't offered fully, yet somehow left open for observation. When she arrived at her apartment, she saw his door move slightly again. This time he appeared with a bundle of mail in his hand. His glance met hers briefly, and the flicker of acknowledgement felt heavier than words. Lena's stomach twisted. It was almost as if that paused moment had stretched overnight, thickened by the quiet that passed between them. "Hey," he said, voice cautious but steady. "Hi," Lena replied. The words sounded smaller than she intended. She hadn't expected to speak so soon, yet now that she did, she noticed the warmth in the air, different from the usual polite civility. He handed her a folded envelope. "This got mixed with mine yesterday. Thought you might want it back." She accepted it with a nod, surprised by how her fingers lingered on the paper. "Thanks," she said softly, meeting his eyes for a heartbeat longer than necessary. He smiled faintly, and then the pause returned. That same delicate hesitation that had drawn her in before hung in the air, waiting for something neither of them knew yet. Lena felt herself leaning just slightly toward him, wanting to bridge the silence, and almost staring to see what might happen if she did. The hallway remained quiet, save for the faint creak of his apartment door closing behind him. Lena lingered for a moment, sensing that the pause had not been just his. Somehow it had become shared, suspended between them in that narrow space. Throughout the morning, Lena kept glancing toward his door. Her work at the small cafe downstairs seemed more distant, her mind divided between steaming coffee cups and the memory of his hesitant voice. She realized she had been noticing him more than she ever had, his quick gestures, the way he ran his fingers through his hair, the quiet hum of thought behind his eyes. It was strange to feel connected without ever speaking more than a few sentences. Later that afternoon, as the sky softened into a warm gold, Lena found herself standing near the mailbox again. His presence was sudden, but not surprising. He had been there just moments before, it seemed, yet the world felt as if it had slowed to let her notice him. "Lena," he said, this time without a pause, and yet his eyes betrayed a hint of caution, as though every word might carry too much weight. "Hi," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The word felt smaller than the space it occupied. He handed her a small packet of seeds. "For your window boxes," he said, almost shyly. "I noticed they're a little empty." Lena felt her chest tighten. She had thought she was the only one noticing these small things, the cracked pots, the brown edges of her geraniums, but here he was, seeing them too. She smiled. "Thank you. That's thoughtful." He nodded and lingered, as if waiting for a cue, a reason to leave or perhaps for her to ask something more. Neither did. The pause stretched between them again, but it wasn't uncomfortable this time. It felt like a conversation in itself, a gentle acknowledgement of unspoken understanding. When Lena finally entered her apartment, she placed the seeds on her windowsill and traced her fingers over the tiny paper packet. The thought of him, his hesitation, and the faint smile he gave her replayed like a quiet song. It was startling how much weight one simple act could carry, how a pause in speech could feel like a doorway to something unknown. That night, she sat by the window, watching the sky deepen into shades of violet and indigo. Every reflection of the streetlights on the wet pavement seemed to echo his earlier hesitation. She wondered whether he thought of her, whether the pause lingered for him as it did for her. Somewhere deep down, Lena realized that those quiet moments, those pauses, small gestures, and subtle hesitations were starting to matter more than she wanted to admit. They were tiny, fragile threads, tying them together in ways neither had dared to maim. As she rested her head against the cool glass, the hallway light across from her flickered. For a brief instant, she imagined him standing there again, watching, waiting, or simply pausing mid-thought. Her heart thudded softly, a mix of curiosity, uncertainty, and something tender that hadn't existed before. Would he ever speak the words that the pause hinted at, or was the magic meant to remain unspoken? And in that question, Lena felt the pull of something entirely unexpected, an invisible bond, suspended in time, waiting for the next moment to unfold. The weekend arrived with a muted glow, the sky a soft blend of gray and pale gold. Lena had planned a quiet day for herself, a book in hand and a cup of tea beside her. Yet she found her thoughts wandering inevitably to him. That pause, the way he had held back just enough, kept replaying, as if it were a secret melody only she could hear. She wandered toward the small courtyard behind their building, hoping the fresh air might untangle the coil of feelings and curiosity curling inside her. The benches were damp from an earlier drizzle, and the faint scent of wet grass filled the space. She sat down, resting her elbows on her knees, staring at the patterned tiles. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant barking of a dog, seemed louder here, and she imagined him walking past, perhaps noticing the way the sunlight caught her hair. As if on cue, the door at the end of the corridor opened. He appeared, holding a canvas bag filled with groceries. The sight of him made her heart stutter. He carried himself differently when he was outside the narrow hallway, more relaxed yet somehow still contained. Lena noticed the way his fingers gripped the bag, careful and deliberate. "Hey," he said, voice soft, unhurried. There was no hesitation this time, but she sensed a subtle tension beneath the surface. "Hi," she replied. She smiled, a little awkwardly, and realized her hands were still folded tightly around her knees. "I didn't expect to see anyone out here," he said, stepping closer. "It's quiet today." "It's peaceful," Lena said. Her voice caught slightly, and she quickly shook her head, trying to focus on the simple act of breathing in the cool air. He leaned against the railing, shifting the weight of the bag to one shoulder. "I guess I'm getting used to these quiet weekends," he added, almost to himself. There was a pause, brief but meaningful. Lena felt it again, the space in his words that spoke more than the words themselves. "Used to them or used to noticing them?" she asked lightly, though her curiosity trembled under the surface. He glanced at her then, a faint smile touching his lips. "Maybe both," he said, and for a moment it seemed as if the pause had vanished entirely, yet the memory of it lingered in her chest like a soft hum. They talked quietly for a while, about small things, the rain from the night before, the errant leaves blown into the courtyard, the patterns of sunlight on the building across the street. Their conversation was easy, yet punctuated by the occasional pause, as though they both sensed something unspoken hovering nearby. Lena realized that these pauses had become as significant as the words themselves. At one point, he gestured toward a patch of soil near the benches. "Do you want to help me plant some of these?" he asked, nodding toward the small packet of seeds she had received earlier. Lena's heart leaped. Sure," she said, rising from the damp bench. The simple act of bending over the soil together felt intimate in a way she hadn't anticipated. Fingers brushing the earth, sharing space in silence, she felt an unexpected closeness. They worked slowly, planting the seeds with deliberate care, occasionally glancing at each other. Lena caught herself noticing every subtle motion, the curl of his hair falling over his forehead, the thoughtful frown when he considered how deep to plant a seed, the gentle, almost hesitant smile when he looked up at her. Each detail felt magnified, significant in ways that were almost dizzying. When they finished, Lena stepped back to admire the tiny patch of green sprouting in neat rows. The air was cooler now, tinged with evening, and the courtyard was quieter than ever. "Looks good," he said, voice calm, yet there was a weight in it, a lingering echo of the pauses she had come to notice so much. "Yeah," Lena murmured. She smiled, feeling the corners of her mouth lift despite herself. The simple shared effort, the quiet closeness, had woven a delicate thread between them. As the first stars appeared faintly in the darkening sky, he shifted slightly, as if preparing to leave. Lena felt an almost magnetic pull, reluctant to let the moment end. She wanted to ask something, anything, but the words caught in her throat, fragile and tentative. He looked at her once more, the pause returning in a different rhythm this time, softer, more intentional. "See you around?" he asked. Lena nodded, unsure whether it was an answer or a question. "Yeah, see you." As he walked away, Lena stayed standing for a moment, watching him disappear into the hallway, the quiet around her amplified by his absence. She realized that each pause, each hesitation, had become a language of its own between them, a dialogue without words, yet heavy with meaning. Later that night, she lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the day. She wondered what those pauses meant, if they were a hesitation born from shyness, reflection, or something more profound she could not name. And she knew, deep in her chest, that she would wait for the next pause, for the next unspoken moment, because they carried a weight that words could never fully capture. The hallway remained quiet, but Lena could almost hear him there, lingering, and she realized she was already noticing the spaces between words more than the words themselves. The following week carried a quiet rhythm, as if the city itself had slowed to accommodate Lena's growing awareness of him. She noticed him more than ever, his measured steps along the corridor, the careful way he placed his keys on the small tray near the door, even the gentle hum he made while preparing a meal she couldn't see. Each observation felt like a discovery, a small window into a life she barely knew, yet one that was beginning to matter deeply. One evening, Lena returned from work later than usual. The hallway lights flickered, casting long shadows that intertwined with the muted patterns of rain still dripping from the overhang. She paused near her door, noticing him standing just outside his own, arms folded loosely, watching the floor. For a moment, she thought he might vanish if she looked away, but his presence was steady, quiet, and intentional. "Evening," she said softly, almost afraid to disturb the calm. "Hey," he replied, and the usual pause followed. Not awkward, not hesitant, but lingering, almost like a careful acknowledgement of the space between them. Lena felt the familiar pull, that subtle tension that had been threading its way through their encounters. I thought I'd ask you something," he said finally, breaking the silence, words slow and deliberate. "Would you like to come see something?" Curiosity and a small flutter of anticipation made her heart beat faster. "Sure," she said. He led her down the narrow stairs into the basement, a space she had never really explored. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the dim glow of a single bulb. He stopped near a corner, where a small wooden table held a collection of photographs, sketches, and notes carefully arranged. "I've been working on this," he said softly, almost reverent. "It's personal." His fingers hovered over a sketch of a quiet street lined with trees, the details tender and meticulous. Lena leaned closer, fascinated. "This is beautiful," she murmured, feeling the intimacy of being shown something so private. The pause lingered again, that it no longer felt distant. It was shared, as if she had stepped into a world that had been waiting for her attention. He smiled faintly, a gentle curve of the lips that made the air between them warm. "Thanks," he said, and the pause stretched, not a hesitation, but a quiet, reflective space that carried more meaning than words could express. They spent the next hour examining the sketches, discussing the stories behind each one. The pauses became a rhythm, a delicate interplay of thoughts and silences. Lena noticed the subtle gestures, the way his eyes softened when he talked about the moments that inspired him, the almost imperceptible nods, as if inviting her to feel rather than speak. As they worked together, Lena felt a strange serenity settle over her. She realized that these pauses, these careful hesitations, were not just gaps in conversation, they were invitations to observe, to understand, to notice the unspoken currents that ran between people. And somehow they had built their own language, one that didn't rely on overt gestures or hurried words. The room darkened as the single bulb flickered, shadows deepening around them. Lena caught herself wondering what he thought of her, whether he felt the same magnetic pull she did whenever he paused mid-sentence. Finally, he gathered the sketches, arranging them neatly back into the canvas bag. "Thanks for looking," he said softly. "You're welcome," Lena replied, heart fluttering in a way she couldn't fully name. As she walked back to her apartment, the quiet corridor seemed different, warmer, alive with subtle tension. She realized that every interaction, every pause, had been shaping something fragile and delicate between them. Later that night, she sat by her window, tracing the outlines of the seed packets she had received days ago. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving a stillness that made her acutely aware of everything: the faint hum of the city, the distant bark of a dog, the memory of his hesitant smile. She felt suspended, caught between anticipation and reflection, waiting for the next pause to teach her more about him, about herself, about the space they were quietly filling together. And as she turned toward the darkened hallway from her window, Lena imagined him standing there again, a shadow waiting for words, a pause holding the weight of something neither had yet spoken aloud. The following evening carried a quiet anticipation, as though the world itself had slowed to allow them both to notice the smallest details. Lena lingered in her apartment, her fingers tracing the rim of her mug, the warmth seeping slowly into her palms. She could almost feel his presence in the hallway, the memory of his pauses threading through the air, gentle yet persistent. A knock at her door startled her, soft but deliberate. Her heart leapt as she opened it to find him standing there, holding a small box wrapped in plain brown paper. His eyes held the familiar, careful hesitation, but there was something steadier now, something more certain. "Hi," he said, voice soft, carrying that familiar weight of thought. "I thought you might like this." Lena's curiosity made her reach for the box, her fingers brushing against his. The contact was brief, electric in a quiet, unspoken way. She looked up at him, noticing the subtle lines of reflection on his face, the faint tension around his shoulders easing as he spoke. "What is it?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He smiled faintly, pausing for a heartbeat as if choosing the right words. "It's a small collection of moments I've been keeping, things I thought you'd appreciate." Opening the box, Lena found photographs of the courtyard where they had planted the seeds, sketches of the narrow hallway, even a pressed flower she recognized from her windowsill. Each item carried the weight of careful observation, of moments noticed and remembered. "This is amazing," she whispered, her fingers brushing over the delicate papers. She looked at him, realizing that each pause, each hesitation, had led to this, a quiet, shared understanding that needed no grand gestures. He shrugged lightly, as if downplaying the significance, yet Lena could see the reflection of care in his eyes. "I've noticed a lot of things," he admitted, voice soft. "Small things, and I thought you might like to see them." The words hung in the space between them, delicate and powerful. Lena felt the familiar warmth, the pull of connection that had grown stronger with every shared pause, every silent acknowledgement. It was more than curiosity now. It was a sense of belonging, a quiet recognition that they had been paying attention to each other in a way that mattered. They stood in the doorway, the box between them, each aware of the delicate tension and gentle trust that had built over days and nights. Lena realized that the pauses she had once found frustrating were now a language of their own, a conversation that existed in glances, gestures, and moments that hung between words. He started, and then paused, letting the silence linger as if it could carry the meaning for him. "I'm glad you noticed them too." "I did," Lena said softly, a small smile touching her lips. "I noticed everything." For a long moment they simply stood there, letting the quiet settle around them like a shared secret. Outside, the streetlights flickered, casting patterns across the hallway floor. Lena realized how much those tiny, careful observations had grown into something beautiful, something that neither had rushed, yet both had felt fully. Finally, he nodded, a gentle acknowledgement, and turned toward his door. Lena lingered, watching him go, feeling the pull of connection in every step he took. It was a quiet, ordinary moment, yet it carried the weight of something extraordinary. As she returned to her apartment, she placed the box on her table, her fingers lingering over it. The memory of every pause, every hesitant word, every gentle gesture returned, and she felt a profound sense of gratitude for the quiet unfolding of these days. Later that night, Lena sat by her window, gazing out at the city. The air felt soft and full of possibility, and she could almost hear the echo of his voice, the gentle hesitations that had shaped the past week into something meaningful. She realized that the pauses were not just moments of hesitation, they were moments of connection, moments of understanding, moments of trust. And in that understanding, Lena felt a quiet joy, a warmth that lingered in her chest. It was the kind of joy that didn't need words, that didn't need rushing, that simply existed in the spaces between moments. The hallway remained quiet, but she knew he would be there again, and she would notice him, pause for him, just as he had paused for her. And in that quiet, shared attention, something gentle and enduring had been born. Lena smiled, her heart full, and for the first time she welcomed the pauses as much as the words, knowing they had changed everything, even if only in small, unforgettable ways.